Thank you. Thanks very much. My paper today is entitled Exploring the Desert, Breaking Bad in Dialogue with Eco-Criticism in the Pentateuch. And in this paper, I'm going to use eco-critical methodology to compare the depiction of two desert locations, the Indian reservation of Tohajili in the television drama series Breaking Bad, and the Sinai Desert in the Pentateuch. Now, Breaking Bad is now one of the most popular and highly rated television drama series of all time. So I hope most of you here today are familiar with the show. But if you're not, there's going to be very few spoilers, actually, as I talk about this. So hopefully it'll be okay. Now, in short, Breaking Bad tells the story of Walter White, a middle-aged chemistry teacher in Albuquerque, who, upon being diagnosed with lung cancer, begins manufacturing crystal meth with an ex-pupil in order to supplement his family's income. Over 5 series, the show charts Walt's transformation from everyday family man to drugs baron. In this paper, I'll demonstrate that eco-critical methodology allows us to explore the desert environments in Breaking Bad and the Pentateuch, and I'll argue that using this methodology reveals some striking similarities between the two locations of Tohajili and Sinai that are both environmental and narrative. And here we've got Tohajili in a scene from the episode Buried in Breaking Bad, and then an image of the present-day Sinai Desert, which I feel is really fairly consistent with the way that the Sinai is depicted in the Pentateuch. Now, before going any further, I'll explain the term eco-criticism. Eco-criticism is a mode of literary criticism that became established in the 1990s. Many definitions and descriptions of eco-criticism have been suggested since this time, but has perhaps been described most succinctly as the study of the relationship between text and the physical world, undertaken in the spirit of environmentalist praxis. And this was the definition offered by Lawrence Buell in his 1995 study, The Environmental Imagination. You'll notice that I highlighted the term physical world, and that's just to underscore that eco-criticism is concerned with not just the natural world, but the manner in which nature and humanity are intrinsically connected and affect each other in both positive and negative ways. So, for example, things like the consumption of fossil fuels or deforestation of rainforests or appreciating the beauty of a sunset. These are all examples of this interconnection, and they're all examples of things that eco-critics would be interested in exploring somehow. Now, eco-criticism is an important critical approach as it facilitates the examination of the physical environment within texts, and this is especially crucial within Western culture, which is predominantly anthropocentric in its worldview. And eco-criticism asks questions such as how is nature depicted in this sonnet, or what attitudes towards consumption are evident in this pop video with helicopters and leather jackets and diamond rings and things. So just as feminist criticism has allowed us to challenge and examine the deep-rooted patriarchal thinking in Western culture, eco-criticism allows us to examine the deep-rooted human-centered thinking of the West, and therefore represents a countercultural voice. Using an eco-critical method proposed by Glotfelty in her 1995 eco-criticism reader, I'll begin by considering the narratives of Breaking Bad and the Pentateuch, asking how do they depict the environments of Tohajili and Sinai. Well, firstly, before saying anything else, I think it's important to observe that whilst Tohajili and Sinai are both depicted within narratives of Breaking Bad and the Pentateuch, they're also real-life locations. So when we watch Breaking Bad, when we read the Pentateuch, we're engaging with fictionalized versions of these actual places. I use the term fictionalized in the sense that they're real places that are represented within these narrative worlds, if you like. And Tohajili and Sinai share environmental characteristics. Firstly, extreme heat. Now, at Tohajili, the heat's evident visibly in the scorched and sandy ground. Indeed, in some long-distance shots, the ground shimmers due to evaporation. Heat's also evident in the manner in which characters behave in response to the environment. So, for example, in episode 1, there's the famous iconic image of Walt cooking crystal meth in his pants. And he does that for kind of a plot reason, but he also does it because the ambient heat allows that to be a possibility. And similarly, in the episode Ozymandias, you see Walt rolling this barrel of money across the desert, which it's so hot he just becomes exhausted through the process of doing it. And extreme heat's also evident in the Sinai desert. In Exodus 16:24, bread from Yahweh melts in the sun because of the heat. And also, notably, heat's analogous to anger in the Exodus narrative, which aids, I think, in the narrative construction of the desert as a hostile place. And I'll return to that later. And secondly, aridity and no surface water. Now, these are consistently evident in the depiction of Tohajili we see on screen, and evident in numerous occasions in the Exodus and Numbers, where there's no water visible or available for the Israelites to drink as they journey through Sinai. And finally, scant vegetation, no food, again evident from the visual depiction of Tohajili. We can observe that there's insufficient flora to provide food that sustains human life, either directly or via animals that can be hunted. And this really recalls the depiction of the Sinai desert in Exodus and Numbers. Now, I'll just qualify a little bit that these observations of the Sinai desert hold true for the most part, but there's one occasion in Exodus 15:27 when the Israelites do find naturally occurring water. And secondly, you may ask, well, what about Yahweh's introduction of quails and manna and water to the desert environment? Well, these things do improve the desert's capacity to sustain life, but these are temporary, and certainly the natural or default state of the desert in the Sinai is one that's inhospitable, one that's scarce in terms of food and water supply. So we can observe numerous environmental similarities between Tohajili and Sinai, but is this observation obvious? And are all deserts the same? Well, I think if you say desert to a Westerner, this generally evokes imagery of a hot and desolate landscape. But from an ecological perspective, however, deserts are characterized by their lack of rainfall, hence deserts can be hot or cold. So what I'm saying is not all deserts are equal. Given that the story of the Exodus is amongst one of the most well-known in Western culture, it seems to me that the Exodus narrative has done much to shape the Western perception of the hot desert as the archetypal desert. Hence, Tohajili draws upon this Western understanding of the desert as a dangerous place beyond civilization. And indeed, Garrard talks about this in his study of eco-criticism. And this observation holds true when we look at the narrative functions of Tohajili and Sinai. Now, Tohajili and Sinai are both liminal spaces in which significant plot and character developments unfold. They both represent places of revelation, danger, and moral ambiguity. As an Indian reservation, Tohajili lies beyond the legal jurisdiction and cultural influence of Albuquerque, in the same way that Sinai is located beyond Egypt. Though in both Breaking Bad and the Pentateuch, plot developments occur when DEA agents and Egyptian authorities respectively pursue the protagonists beyond and into these spaces. Now, the Indian reservation, Tohajili, is central to the narrative of Breaking Bad. Indeed, the first episode, the pilot, opens at Tohajili. The single desert location is the place where Walter first reveals his ability to manufacture exceptionally pure crystal meth. Walter attempts the murder of a rival drug distributor. Walter secretes his immense fortune, and where a climatic standoff unfolds. The standoff results in Walter revealing the location of his drug money, some significant characters being fatally wounded in a gunfight, and Jesse being taken captive by a neo-Nazi gang. Now, these narrative developments recall the themes of revelation, danger, and moral ambiguity associated with the Sinai desert that we see in the Pentateuch. Now, consider the depiction of Yahweh revealing the Ten Commandments and indeed the other laws to Moses in Exodus 19-23. Now, this is mirrored in Tohajili, where in episode 1, Walter reveals his ability to cook exceptionally pure crystal meth, and in the episode Tohajili, where Walter reveals the location of the vast fortune that he's amassed through the sale of his drugs. Now, the danger that Israel faces is not just from the physical environment of the Sinai desert, i.e. the heat, the lack of food and the water, but from Amalek's military advances in Exodus 17 and the military threat from Edom in Numbers 20. Now compare this to the danger encountered at Tohajili, where a standoff unfolds. The standoff occurs between the DEA and neo-Nazi gang associated with WALT. Militaristic combat ensues and lives are lost. And moral ambiguity. Now, this is an important feature of the Exodus narrative. In Exodus 17, Yahweh declares war with Amalek. In Numbers 21, Israel fights with the Amorites, killing them all in battle and settling in their land. And then Yahweh orders Moses to kill King Og and all his people. And Israel possesses this land too. And similarly, in Numbers 31, Israel's commanded by Yahweh to fight Midian, resulting in the murder of the nation's kings, all its men, and the taking of the Midianite women and children into captivity, alongside livestock and valuable possessions. Now, similarly again, moral ambiguity is noticeable in Tohajili. As viewers, we wonder if it's morally acceptable for Walt to begin manufacturing meth for widespread sale, if his murder and attempted murder of rival dealers is in any way justified, if Walt should have done more to save the life of Hank, if it is reasonable in the circumstances for Walt to demand that the neo-Nazis kill Jesse. In both Sinai and Tohajili, events unfold, leaving us questioning the morality of the characters. Is violence really acceptable in the circumstances? Can it be justified? Or what about murder? Or what about theft? In conclusion, given that the story of the Exodus is amongst the most well-known in biblical narratives in the Western culture, it seems to me that it has helped to shape the Western perception of the desert as a hot, inhospitable and dangerous landscape beyond the fringes of civilization. I propose that the desert location Tohajili evokes the familiar physical characteristics and narrative features of the Sinai desert in the Pentateuch for the viewer. This creates a tense narrative setting in which revelation, danger and moral ambiguity are anticipated and unfold in a compelling manner. Thank you.